So my name is Sridhar. I am the technology leader for IBM Security. Very privileged to work with a large number of clients. IBM Security is a combination of products and services that bring together some unique value to drive outcomes for our clients. I'm actually very privileged to work with a few thousand clients, both small, medium, large. And what I want to do, and some of you probably recognize some of the names, right? Things like the US Open or the Wimbledon, those are the easy ones, large financial institutions, large retailers. So we've gained a lot of insight. And what I want to do today is do a little bit of a breath first to focus on some of the top priorities that we see from our clients and then drive into a bit of a details of best practices of what we see as working. We've got 30 minutes, and we've got a little bit buffer too. We're very lucky. So if you have any questions, feel free to, put your hand up or come to the mic, and we can definitely make this interactive. I think the titles are missing, which is fine. I think titles are missing, but that's okay. I think what is happening in the threat landscape, most of you are familiar with, right? You're day two into the conference. I don't want to talk about the fact that the attack landscape is growing. As a result, we need to go do a better job of reducing the mean time for response, right? At the same time, we have to go figure out how to deal with compliance and regulatory requirements. And can I get some technical support? Is there a technical support for this or no? Okay, we will adapt. We will adapt. I believe we cannot fix the slides. um, so the point I'm trying to make over here is we are all inundated with a lot of pressures from, managing threats to compliance requirements to the pandemic to even the future, right? But what we hear consistently from our clients are the top four things. The four things that they are trying to drive as a priority. One is around protection of data as most of our clients are moving to hybrid cloud. We define hybrid cloud as a combination of on-prem, off-prem, and a combination of different clouds, whether it's public or private, right? In such situations, how do you protect that data? The second one that we hear quite often and gets prioritized at the investment level is around protecting the access to applications from anybody, anywhere, any device, or any network for that matter. That has accelerated because of the pandemic. Most of us are working from home or some sort of a hybrid environment, right? So that has accelerated how we think about a more of a adaptive access. The third priority that we see quite often is around threat. I think that shouldn't be any surprise to most of you, right? That's not a new topic. That's not going to be something that we will get done anytime soon. But what is happening is most of the organizations are inundated with too many alerts, too many tools, too much of data, and too few people. So how do you optimize something like that to focus on the right things and drive results? And the last one is around optimizing of the security program. Every news article talks about security being a board level discussion. What that means is it's no longer a science project. That means we need to make sure that it's optimized, it's make sure that it is driving the return on investments. And just like what we do with the business, it needs to be optimized to make sure that you're leveraging the investments in the right way to drive the business. So what I want to do is spend a few minutes talking about each one of these in a little bit of a detail, use some examples and client patterns, and hopefully that will inspire you to be able to embark on your own journey as well. Again, my apologies for the slides, but it's okay. Um, the first topic over here is the data and hybrid cloud, right? Now, data has never been more important than what we are seeing right now, both for the organizations as well as the consumers. Organizations look at it as a crown jewel, right? How do I monetize it? While infrastructure, applications are all getting outsourced, data still belongs to the organization and can be monetized. Consumers, on the other hand, are looking at that from a privacy perspective, making sure that the data is right? Making sure that it's safeguarded. But unfortunately, the reality is with the transformations, the data is moving from the on-prem data centers to a large number of external infrastructure components like cloud, whether it's private or public, or third-party providers like SaaS vendors. Trying to get a visibility across all of that is not an easy thing, right? And that's why there's a focus on data security. I know the number is missing from here, but I think we see that in 70% of the clients that we work with. That's a huge number. Now, it's not a new topic. Data is not a new topic. In fact, if you go to the solution area, a number of vendors are talking about data security. Most of the time, we've been looking at it in silos. Go fix a problem, go do encryption, or go do access, or do DLP, or activity monitoring, or compliance, or privacy, right? And that is important, but with the explosion of data and the explosion of the attack surface, a holistic approach is working much better in many organizations. Simply speaking, taking a step back to move forward. The idea over here is to basically go and discover data, right? Especially as it is leaving the enterprise to a variety of providers like SaaS and infrastructure providers. How do you discover the data? Not just structured data, but unstructured data as well. And traditional approaches like, let me go get the database name and the IP address and the username and password are not going to work. We got to look at things like network analytics, flow data, being able to use some level of analytics to be able to find out this smells like a data, this feels like a data, this must be data, right? And once you understand that, then comes the question of applying things like natural language processing to be able to understand the sensitivity of that data, whether it's public, private, confidential, right? And you can do classification on a structured data, like database columns and tables. But unstructured data, you gotta go a little bit deeper, analyze not only the documents or the repositories, but also the elements within that to say what is a personally identifiable information and what is not. Once you do that, the approach then is risk analytics. Risk is, means different things to different people. It's basically a multidimensional risk analysis. Understand the vulnerability, the threat, business criticality, the weaponization. There's a number of different parameters. But the idea is to not bet on one, but a combination of these that come in so that you are able to then manage, based on the organization, what is the appetite for that risk. Now you have an approach. Now you have a method to the madness where you now can say, let me apply the protection policies. Could be context-based access, making sure that the right individual has access to the right data under the right conditions for the right purpose. Or it could be encryption at the disk level, right, at the application level, all the way to in-memory use. You don't want to put every application, every piece of data into memory. It's a very, very performance-intensive thing. At the same time, just by encrypting disk, it's not going to be sufficient. But applying the right policies based on the sensitivity, based on the risk, helps you optimize trying to use the right tool for the right job. Now, having said that, you still need to monitor all of that, right? Because things change, regulations evolve, what we call the compliance aspects creep. So you got to monitor that to ensure two things, right? One is compliance, be able to demonstrate compliance, right? Not just saying that, yes, I've done the 18 things, but when I miss one thing, be able to identify that and go remediate that automatically. That's when you get the continuous compliance. The second aspect is identifying the risk of data theft or breach, right? This is where you're basically talking about identifying the vulnerabilities, the risk associated with activity monitoring, right? Things like if the person is classified as a cashier or a teller trying to access a sensitive database is an anomaly. Be able to detect that and look at those breach patterns. When you do that, then you can get a when you do that, you get a little bit more of a structure in how to address this problem. I was working with a large financial institution, multinational bank, that you can imagine. Of course, thousands of databases. And when we took an approach to basically say, let's go and take one line of business, let's go discover all the things that you're doing, put some risk analytics. It's not like they don't have tools before. Any large multinational organization is going to have a lot of tools. They were doing a lot of work in DLP, activity monitoring, and as a result, they're spending close to about 200 to 300 million events per day for this one sort of business application. All of the events going to an SIM or something like a security event and information management tool like Splunk and Curadar. That's not just a volume of noise, but also cost associated with it. It's not cheap to store that much of data. That costs about 250 gigabytes per day, right? So when you applied the risk analytics on top of it, they were able to get the reduction to about less than a couple of hundred events per day, more than 95% optimization, basically. And they're able to go protect the application and the data. The second pattern that I want to talk about, it's funny because it's blank slides, but it's fine. The second pattern I want to talk about is identity and the fact that most of the users are becoming more and more hybrid. That means working from home, working from your favorite coffee shop, working from the office, secured location, unsecured location, bringing in any device, right? We got used to the pandemic situation where we've integrated work and life in a meaningful manner, right? And it's good. It's good. But unfortunately, it also brings in some of the risk associated with it. That's accelerating investment in this area. You want to be able to allow anybody to come from any network, any device to access application securely so that you can improve the productivity for your workforce as well as decrease the friction for the end users. But the reality again is that we are allowing different locations which are not secure as office locations, different devices that may not be as secure. In fact, part of my team is an incident response team, about 250 worldwide experts focused on just 1-800 help sort of situations, right? When something gets breached, they go and then remediate. More than 40% of the breaches that we saw were caused by phishing attacks, whether it's ransomware or whether it's a simple attack. More than 40%, right? And that doesn't include weak passwords, that doesn't include risk associated with non-compliant devices, that doesn't include, when you use VPN, you're giving access to the entire network, and that doesn't include the APIs, especially in the open banking era, where we see a lot of attacks coming from third-party providers. Countries like UK have done a really good job of regulating to a certain extent. US and Canada still got ways to go, right? That's the reason why identity is becoming a very high priority for a number of business leaders. The approach that has seems to have the approach that seems to work for a lot of organizations is basically leveraging a risk-driven approach or a zero-trust approach, and some of you may know that. Zero trust is a philosophy, right? Least privilege, continuous verification, and assume that there's a breach. It's difficult to go buy a product which does that. It's a philosophy that needs to be adopted. And the philosophy can be adopted one use case at a time. It's like basically saying, I want to remodel the house, right? Especially if you're living in a 1950 or 1940 house, your plumbing, your electricity, your ducting is all dated. So option one for you is to get out of the house and spend the money to go and redo everything. Or especially if you're living in that house, what do? You tend to take one room at a time and modernize it. As you modernize it, you try to get it to code. You get the right plumbing. You get the right AC. You get right electricity, right? And you modernize it one at a time. That's what's happened with identity. It's become the perimeter of defense for pretty much all the different parts of the organizations. CISO, CIO, line of business. And the approach that seems to work is, number one, secure the users. Of course, there's a lot of tools out there, access management, identity management, privilege management, but bringing them together in a manner that they're talking to each other is making a huge difference, so that you know who has access to what and what they have done with it, right? That's when you can apply single sign-on, you can adaptive access, you can do MFA, as well moving into the future. Organization, like another institution I was working with, a consumer retail company, when we did the reduction of MFA, multi-factor authentication, from 14% to 4%, we saw the consumer transaction go up by 30%. So there is a tangible business reason for doing that, basically. So it's, number one is secure the user. Number two is to be able to go and secure the devices. And number three is secure the network. So what you're doing over here is you're taking zero trust principles and basically saying that, don't just give me access to everything. Define adaptive access control based on the context. Context of user, context of device, context of the network, context of the behavior. And then you apply that multidimensional risk scoring that we were talking about to apply the right level of friction or the right level of access to applications. If we do this, we're able to support the security leaders to make sure they identify threats which are coming from identity through analytics, like credential stuffing. If we do this, we are supporting the CIO who's focused on supporting the business and the growth of business by making sure identities are factoring in APIs, DevOps, and DevSecOps, right? And infusing agility and speed. Plus, you're supporting the line of business where they're asking for passwordless authentication or next generation of self-sovereign identity, basically. Trying to see what's on there. The third topic is around threat. Is around threat. And if I look at threat, I don't want to spend too much time on this because this is something most people resonate with or understand to say, listen, there's too many tools that are not talking to each other. There's too much of data that doesn't make complete sense. There's too few skills. How do I optimize the program, right? Because if you don't, you have issues with business continuity, like ransomware. Oh, there you go. Success. Can you see this okay now? Okay. Yeah. So, they restarted the presentation. That's okay. Right, this is what I was talking about, right? The third pattern that we've seen is about how do you get to the next generation of threat management where you get into more of predictive approach. So most of you are familiar with okay, I'm just going to talk right now. Most of you are familiar with SIM and SOAR, right? I mean, those are tools that we have seen in the past that gives us the culture of you find something and you fix something. It's a little bit of a reactive approach. It's like basically saying, a lot of Canadians, you guys love hockey, and right now there's baseball going on and football coming up in the near future. If you just play defense, that's not the best thing in a playing field, right? So you got to get to a little bit more of a proactive approach of moving further left and getting to a little bit more of the predictive aspect of it. The idea of it is to reduce the noise so that we're not inundated with the volume of data that is coming in or the volume of noise that is coming in, dealing with the critical resources that we need. So the approach that seems to work really well is for organizations that have moved from being reactive, taking a more holistic approach of adding reactive and proactive together. An example could be something like, ASM, attack surface management, right? Basically gives you an offensive view. That means an attacker view of your environment. When you scan your environment, tells you everything that is potentially a risky endpoint that could be used by an attacker automatically. It doesn't take rocket science to breach anybody these days. But once you know that, now you can use that as a context for doing a better job of prioritizing your alerts, improving the accuracy, and increasing the speed of response. Now, it's easier said than done, right? How do you do that? You do that with an open approach. The chances are everybody has tools, right? A SIM tool or a SOAR tool or an EDR tool or a NDR tool or different providers like cloud providers, Sentinel and Amazon and Google. They all provide tools. They're all good tools. However, they don't necessarily talk to each other. So leveraging an approach like an XDR, which is extended detection and response, helps you in safeguarding your investments. Safeguarding your investments that you've already made so that now you're able to go and look across all your tools be able to apply machine learning and AI, which goes without saying these days, right? Everybody's doing AI, but doing it right takes time, right? Takes to make sure that it is free from bias, explainable, it's robust. But assuming it's the right AI, that's when you can do a better job of improving the accuracy of detection. So you're not spending time chasing after false positives, increasing the speed of investigation so that you're quickly coming to a resolution. If you look at the most recent threat report, an average breach time is about 200 plus days. And add another 70 days on top of it to remediate that. That's too long, right? The whole point is to bring it down within a few minutes, basically, right? And then once you know that, then it's a question of automating the response. In some cases, it's manual. In other cases, it's response. That's where open standards like Open Cybersecurity Alliance or Stick Shifter or OCSF, which is a combination of number of different vendors coming together. Like if you look at OCSF, Splunk, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM come together to say, you know what? Let us figure out how to make a standardized way of putting data into a data lake so that you can apply your machine learning models on top of it, right? Or things like Open Cybersecurity Alliance. That tells you how do we go and do a federated search without necessarily pulling all the data into a huge data ocean. That's a humongous task, right? It's okay to have multiple data lakes. How do you make sense of it? It's like basically solving an investigation at a crime scene. If you have 10 people at a crime scene, all 10 talking different languages, it becomes really difficult for the detective to make sense out of it. However, if you standardize in terms of making one query that translates to whether it's French or German or English or whatever, and comes back in a structured manner, that makes it so much more faster. That's the approach which is working really well in the market. And a great example that I can talk about is, it's a question of time. You've seen at least some of our work at, Masters and US Open. You'll see the next one at the World Cup Soccer in Qatar, right? 60 plus agencies. When you do a games like that in a country, you got to go figure out how do I bring the country together so that if something happens, how do you take a response which is not just security but across the entire critical infrastructure? How do you do that? You can't have one product, you can't have one tool, you can't have one process, but you got to be able to bring it together so that the games can go well. Same concept in New York, right? You got multiple agencies, multiple, tools. Same concept in, large ports where we see a lot of these things. So this is working really well in terms of moving the needle on threat management. I want to do a 30-second deep dive on the attack surface management, since I mentioned it really briefly, right? This is a new and emerging aspect which is coming out, right? Now, how you do it, there's multiple ways of doing it, right? IBM, number of other vendors, right? But the idea here is to take an attacker's perspective of your environment. What does an attacker see in your environment? So basically, use a domain, whether it's www.mycompany.com or mycompany.com/an application. Use that as a starting point, and within a few hours, you're able to get a very good landscape of what attackers see. Typically, we see a few thousand endpoints. Out of that, then use risk as a way to prioritize what should be the focus very quickly so that you're able to then go and use your resources. For sure, we are going to have the skills problem, right? Especially with the recession and everything else. That's not going to go away. However, it helps us in terms of how to prioritize your skills for the right set of reasons to be able to protect the organizations. This area is going to continue to grow. This is looking at the external attack surface. It's going to grow into internal attack surface as well, right? And it's going to evolve into more and more breach simulation. Those are all emerging markets which are coming in, but the idea is you're shifting left. The last point I want to make is around optimizing the program, right? Most of you have a security program, which is great, trying to do a lot with what we have. So many of the security leaders are spending time in optimizing. It's exactly like what we do at home. When we have budget constraints, when we have resource constraints, what do? We go back and look, okay, do we really need that 72-inch TV this year, right? Or do we need that, you know, 5-star hotel versus a 2-star hotel, right? So that's what a lot of security leaders are doing with a way to go and optimize their program. What you see on the right are the top 5 things that we've seen. The number one issue that we always find is lack of alignment of priorities, right? The business wants something, the security team may not be 100% aligned, right? Understand the journey, right? While, as an example, yesterday we heard about quantum. The threat is not there right now, but the risk is there, right? So how do you plan for a target state and a current state and get started so that you don't get deer in a headlight or a moose in a headlight over here, right? So these are some of the top 5 that we see. We've talked about zero trust as an approach, and you saw me give an example before of how it is applied to adaptive access and identity. The other one that is really good for this is the journey to cloud. This is a summary of about a few thousand clients in the last 3 years. I wanted to do a quick analysis of what's working and what's not working, right? Because, as a vendor, what do? When a customer comes and says, hey, can you do this? Of course we'll do it, right? But if you step back and look at the data, what it's saying is that if you just take an application and shift it directly to the cloud, yeah, you're going to get some cost reductions, but it's not going to be as optimized as you want it to be. But if you move further right, meaning you're trying to do application modernization by using threat modeling and being able to scan the application, or you move further right in terms of integrating security with DevOps so that you're not a gate, but you're a guardrail, then it becomes really impactful in making business outcomes over there. All the way to the zero trust, where you are actually breaking down the application and rebuilding it in a manner that is meant for 21st century, right? This is my example of the remodeling at home. Just some data for you in terms of helping outcomes that have helped others that hopefully will influence your strategy and decisions as well. I want to leave one last point with you, right? I'm a technology leader, and everything that we talked about is here and now. Here and now, we got to focus on it. But the reality is, our world is continuing to evolve, right? There's more threats, supply chain, right? OT, you've got quantum and a metaverse and digital decentralized identity, et cetera. So I kind of use this simple horizon as a way that helps me innovate and keep up with the rest of the world. I hope it helps you too and inspires you. I look at it as 3 horizons, right? Everything that we talked about is in horizon 1, right? That basically means if you have 10 people, I would probably put 8 of them on that, right? Or whatever ratio that makes sense to you, right? And then horizon 2 is what I should be expecting next year or next time frame. Things like risk analytics center or risk operations center, where you're bringing in a number of different silos within an organization to evaluate the risk. Be able to do more in terms of combining physical and non-physical security, right? All the way to the 3rd horizon, where you're now looking at things like sovereign identity, things like quantum safe cryptography, which is going to impact all of us. But If you plan it right now, I think it makes it so much more easier later on. With that, thank you for allowing me to go a couple of more minutes. Sorry for the technical issues over there, but hopefully this was useful, and I'll be here for any questions, either here or at the IBM booth at the Solution Center. Thank you.